I'm going to give you the numbers in lakhs, and then I'm going to tell you that I actually, out of interest, I actually compounded these 1950 numbers and brought them up to what their value would be in 2020. And I used a figure of 5%, assumed a 5% inflation rate. The Nizam of Hyderabad got 50 lakhs, which, if you compound at 5%, is the equivalent of 17.5 crores today. 17.5 crores, a very tidy sum of money. Baroda got 26.5 lakhs, which is equivalent to 9.3 lakhs. Mysore got 26 lakhs, which is 9.1 crores. Gwalior got 25 lakhs, which is 8.75 crores. And number 11, Bhopal, got 11 lakhs, which was 3.85 crores. For those of you who are interested, the distribution of princely states privy purses showed that at the lower end, 395 states got an average privy purse of 25,000, which works out to, in today's money, to 8.75 lakhs. And I've obviously told you what the 11 largest states got. In addition, the princes got tax-free privy. In addition, the princes got the privilege of retaining their personal property, their palaces, their jewelry, their cash and bank balances. They got free lifetime medical care for themselves and their family. They got free electricity, exemption from customs duty, armed escorts, state funerals, qualified immunity from civil prosecution. Many of them were made Raj Pramukhs. These were the benefits that they got. It's also worth adding that their successors' privy purses were capped at 10 lakhs. The total cost of privy purses awarded was 5.8 crores in that day. In return for that, the government of India received 77 crores in cash and bank balances. A very, very good financial transaction from that point of view. Now, moving on, let's fast forward. As you're all aware, in 1967, Mrs. Gandhi won the elections. Mrs. Gandhi was looking for an ideological position for herself. She was dependent at that time on the syndicate. She desperately wanted to build her own identity. And to do so, she opted to develop and promote to the people of India a pro-poor program. One of the elements of the pro-poor program was to eliminate privy purses. So a resolution was passed at the AICC in 1967 to eliminate privy purses. Nothing came out of this. Subsequently, the Home Minister, Chauhan, was asked to negotiate with the princes for the abolition of privy purses, and he conducted a negotiation with the Raja of Rajgata. Again, nothing came of this. At that time, the Jam Sahab came up to the government with a very interesting proposal. He had recognized the fact that public sentiment was very much in favor of the abolition of privy purses. So his proposal to the government of India was that you may abolish the privy purses, but please give us 20% of the value of the 20 years worth of privy purses in advance. 25% in cash, 25% in bonds that will be redeemed after 20 years, and the balance 50% as a contribution to a public charitable trust run by the Maharajas. Mrs. Gandhi liked the proposal. She put it forward, but it did not get accepted. As history then demonstrates, Mrs. Gandhi then moved a constitutional amendment. The amendment was defeated by one vote in the Rajya Sabha. Subsequent to that, she issued an ordinance. All this happened over the period 69-71. She issued an ordinance. The ordinance was challenged by 4 princes in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the princes. It ruled that Mrs. Gandhi's act was ultra vires of the Constitution. However, Mrs. Gandhi came back. You're all aware that in the aftermath of the Bangladesh war, she was riding a tiger. She was riding an incredible wave of popularity. She had the numbers, and she was able to push through an amendment in the constitution which abolished the privy purses. And that ended this chapter. Now, I am towards the end of my talk, but certain ethical and moral questions, I think, do arise. Number one, did Patel and Menon sail a little too close to the wind in terms of first promising to take only accession on a limited number of subjects, promising autonomy on everything else, but then creating a situation where the princes were forced to integrate? This is to be kept in the context of the fact that both Patel and Nehru, over the course of 1947, had repeatedly assured the princes that if they acceded, their autonomy would be respected. The second question that arises is, was Lord Mountbatten aware of the intent, if there was an intent, of Patel, Nehru, and Menon to actually facilitate integration? This is very important because remember that Lord Mountbatten was of royal blood. He was from the House of Windsor. His word carried enormous weight with the princes, and there is no doubt about the fact that his famous speech of the 25th of July had influenced the princes too. So where did Lord Mountbatten stand on this? It is known that when Mrs. Gandhi abolished privy purses, it is known that Mrs. Gandhi abolished privy purses, Lord Mountbatten did react quite aggressively, but we do not know how he saw the process of integration. The third issue is, was it inevitable? Would the princes have been swept out of power if they had not integrated? And finally, I come to the question of the unilateral repudiation of all the treaties by the British Crown. These were treaties between a sovereign monarch and a sovereign prince. These were unilaterally repudiated. Was this fair? Was this correct? So, I do not know the answer to the first question. What was the intention of Patel? What is very clear is that all the documentation, all the agreements signed between the princes and the Union of India, the instruments of accession, the amended instruments of action, these documents were comprehensively drafted. They carried proper legal weight. Having said that, it is a good question as to whether the princes, if they had had the opportunity to truly exercise free will, if they had not been in a difficult situation, would they have actually signed it? Lord Mountbatten's position, not known. I have unfortunately not had the opportunity to read his memoirs written by Ziegler, by his hagiography written by Ziegler. I intend to read it and to understand more about this. But it is very unlikely, I would think, that Lord Mountbatten was motivated by anything but the best interest of India. He clearly wanted to leave behind a strong India. He was conscious about the fact that there was the great game in the offing, that India was a valuable bulwark and supporter for the British, and he should leave behind a deep reservoir of goodwill. Was this inevitable for the princes? It probably was. The post-colonial world saw sweeping nationalist movements. The time for democracy and representative institutions had come. It is clear that the sweep of history would have carried the princes along and under it. And finally, on the question of treaties. Treaties, the doctrine, there is a doctrine, rebus sic stantibus, which suggests that a treaty can be considered to be capable of being broken if the circumstances change to an extent that the effective execution of the treaty in terms of the obligation of one party to the other can no longer be exercised. It may be argued that the British were in no position any longer, since they had no authority left over India, to execute any of the treaties. That, in that sense, this was fair. The counter-argument to that, put forward again by British constitutional experts, is that the very essence of a treaty is that it is binding on both parties. Right? This is a question which I would leave to constitutional experts to answer. In the end, let me say that the princes of India left behind by their action an India that now acquired a geographical scale, an economic potential, a military capability, and a strategic profile that has undoubtedly enabled India to emerge as a front runner among the nations in the world, and hopefully in the course of the next few decades, become a true global power. To a very great extent, this nation owes a debt to its former princes of India for their contribution to nation building. Thank you. I am now open to questions.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll first take some questions. If there are any, wait for a few minutes for the questions to pour in. I think that was a really interesting session, sir, and some very valid points that were raised by you. Most certainly, there was a significant contribution in terms of financial resources that at the time of independence, financial resources and the infrastructural resources that the princes and princely states brought to the Union of India. And Mr. Sarabji and Mr. Data write in their book, Recollecting the Days from Mr. Palkiwala, how they considered the abolition of the privy presses to be, in a sense, a constitutional betrayal. And it's a very interesting point that you do end on, and perhaps that can raise the scope for another discussion at a later stage. If we have any questions, we'll be open to them from the audience. You can directly send them across to us in the chat box. So I believe you were absolutely clear and lucid in your presentation, and there's not much scope for doubt, which I believe I would also say from so having listened to it throughout. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us today and for this great, really excellent presentation. It's been to the point. It's been dealing with something that has been historically relevant, and I think it's sort of again the point that you do end on. This is the question of privy purses and the fact that the constitutional amendment was itself defeated in Parliament, and even the Supreme Court had struck down any sort of actions from the side of the government. But still, Mrs. Gandhi went ahead with the ordinance. I think it's a very interesting point in students in law and history, and most certainly that. Thank you so much, Mr. Verma, for joining us. And once again, a big thank you from the Indian Music Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. It's been a great pleasure, and I look forward to doing more. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.